Pastor Bill here again with City of God Church and Champion City Mission. That's the name of the homeless shelter that we've been operating in partnership with Inside Out at the Inside Out Community Center in 501 South Wittenberg. And I want to talk to you a little more about the homeless crisis in Springfield, or perhaps I should call it the homeless fiasco in Springfield. Is it a crisis or is it a fiasco? Well, the truth is, I think it's a bit of both, and I'd like to share with you a little about that. So I realize that I've done a lot of videos lately on this subject, and I appreciate your patience listening and learning about what's been going on here. And again, I just want to continue to thank everyone who has contributed in some way. Those of you who've donated money, those of you who've donated resources like pillows and blankets and personal hygiene, toothpaste and deodorant and clothes and boots and hats and gloves. So many things go into this, and the people who have come and donated your time, your precious time, working in this center to help make this a reality. Those folks, all of the folks that have come and have been hands-on here, are not the people who are employed to do this with government funds. They're not the people who've been charged by the government with the responsibility and obligation to help the homeless people in our community, but they're ordinary people like you and me who have seen that there was a problem and have opened their hearts and their wallets and their prayers and have come out of their comfort zones to try to help. So thank you so much. And there's so many people whose lives are being affected by this in a positive way. Unfortunately, there are also some people whose feathers are being ruffled in a not so positive way. And I want to talk about that a little bit tonight. So last weekend, 24/7 Now News did a story about some of the good things that are happening here at the Champion City Mission and people being helped, and about the winter storm and its effects on people. And during that story, they showed about a 10-second clip, a 10-second piece from a Facebook Live video that my wife had posted sometime in early December about the homeless crisis. And during that clip, she mentioned that the city wasn't doing anything to resolve this problem. And now so a couple of days later, I received an email and a telephone call from local leaders, a local pastor who's been charged with leading a faith-based group in conjunction with the city officials to help with the homeless crisis, expressing outrage that clip had been shown, that the statements were made. He claimed that it was disparaging and that it made the city officials look bad who were working so hard to help with this problem. And so I want to talk about that, and I want to offer some clarification. And first, as I mentioned to him, the statement was not made recently. It wasn't made this week that the city wasn't doing anything. They are doing some things now. We don't feel like they're doing the right things, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But they are doing some things. But at the time the statement was made in early December, the local homeless shelter, IHN, had closed their shelters, and they had, in conjunction with the city, had decided on using hotel rooms as the sole method of addressing the homeless crisis. All of the available hotel rooms had been used up, and there were still more than 150 people on the streets, according to the information that we had been provided with. People who were sleeping in the cold, sleeping under bridges, sleeping in the rain, potentially freezing to death, going hungry, unable to sit down and have a meal, unable to take a shower or wash their clothes. It was a terrible situation, and not enough was being done. In fact, nothing was being done for those people at that time. So my wife was so moved by that she went out on the street herself. She went out on the street to sleep on the street, to experience what it would be like, and to call attention to that plight. I'm so proud of her and applaud her for caring so much and taking such a risk to come outside of her comfort zone, to come outside of her safety net, to put herself at risk and give up her comfort, and to go out into those freezing conditions alone to try to call attention to the needs of people that can't help themselves. And I won't tolerate anyone trying to put that in a negative light or suggesting that she should be censored so that they can look good. I'm sorry if it ruffles your feathers, but nothing was happening to do that. And as a result of that Facebook video, my wife went out in the cold, alone on the streets at night, and she did a video where she called people's attention to this in the cold and the snow. And so many people responded to that video. People came forward and they contributed. They contributed money, they contributed blankets, they contributed cots and pillows, and they contributed their time and their effort and their love and their compassion. And it wasn't the people that have been charged with helping. It wasn't the people that have received millions of dollars that came forward and helped. It wasn't the people who are being paid full-time salaries right now to sit home on a no-touch, safe environment and push buttons to put people in hotel rooms if they can and leave them in the street if they can't. It wasn't those people that came forward. It was people like you. I want to thank you. I really want to thank you on behalf of so many people. And when the result from that was so overwhelming and so good, I'm not going to sit by silently and let someone criticize or try to censor that. I'm sorry, again, if it ruffles people's feathers. It's just such a shame that fellow pastors, fellow Christians are more worried about ruffled feathers than frozen bodies. What a shame. What a shame it is. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what's been going on, because actually the entire homeless crisis that we're experiencing in Springfield, in my opinion, is a huge fiasco that was completely avoidable and shouldn't have happened. It resulted from the homeless shelter's decision, under the guidance and direction and influence and in cooperation with the city of Springfield, their decision to close the local homeless shelter in response to the COVID pandemic. Now, it was reported in news articles and other venues that I'd seen, it was reported that the homeless shelter closed as a result of orders, of government orders to close, that congregant shelters had been ordered closed. And so we believed that. We would have done something to help a lot sooner if we'd known that it was possible, and I think a lot of other people would have as well. But after the homeless shelter closed, people began to be put up in hotel rooms. A couple of things happened. One thing that we noticed and we were troubled by all summer was that so many children were being put in these hotel rooms. So many single moms or families with children were being placed in these hotel rooms without any accountability or supervision. Now, some of the folks that are homeless, a good number of them have life-controlling issues, drug addictions or alcohol addiction, or things that have led to their homelessness in the first place. And in a shelter environment, there are a lot of support services, or at least there should be, and there's certainly accountability. They can't just leave their kids and go out and party and use drugs and what have you. So we noticed right off that, because our ministry Inside Out works with a lot of impoverished families and a lot of youth and a lot of at-risk families. We noticed a number of youth were being put in these hotel rooms and left without their parents. Or some of the teens were being invited to teen parties, preteen parties, where their parents would leave them in the hotel for the whole weekend while they would go out and party. We're aware of some kids that were left there for days at a time while their parents were in other cities. And children being exposed to sex and drugs and who knows what else. And some of these places are, one boy was, I heard, slept in the hallway at the Red Roof Inn because he didn't know where his mother was and couldn't get in the room. Things like that have been happening for quite some time. These rooms, many of them are being used as party spots and brothels and Lord, who knows what else, because there's no accountability given. There's no The method that's being used for distributing them is actually, in my opinion, artificially increasing the number being reported as the homeless population. So we're told that the homeless population has increased by 350% here in the city. You may be surprised to learn that that's not the case in any other city in Ohio that I can find out about. There may be something that surprises me, so I challenge anyone with statistics or knowledge of any other city that has a homeless population increase as a result of COVID, even close to what we're reporting. Please let me know, because I have searched and researched, and I can't find one in the country. I can't find another city in the country that's reporting a 350% increase in homelessness as a result of COVID. As a result of COVID, most of the other communities that I found are reporting ranges of 50 to 100% increase. But When these hotel rooms have been made available, many of the people taking advantage of them are people that have cell phones and can easily contact and leave a message to be called back, because there's a process that's involved in this, so that it can be hands off and no touch. And many of the people that are taking advantage of these things are folks that would never have checked into a homeless shelter. There are people, some of the people are people that already had a place to stay with family. They were already staying with family or with friends. They may not have had a lease in their own name, but they certainly had a place to stay, and they had safe places for their children, some of them, a number of them. But when these hotel rooms became available, it seemed like a better option than where they were, or better than paying rent. So many of the people who had the resources, the knowledge, and the communication to ability have gone in and gobbled up the resources. And that's left a lot of the people who don't have cell phones and don't have the ability to communicate or find out what's available or what the process is. They can't just walk in the door at IHN because IHN is closed. So they've been left on the streets and under the bridges and in the cold. And one of the first things I learned was that there was no order given by the local health department to close the local homeless shelters in the first place. This came as quite a shock to me, because we'd been told clearly that there was. We've been told that not only in the news articles that we read, but by the people at the city of Springfield. The person in charge of the program, Shannon Meadows, had specifically stated that the IHN had closed because of the orders of the local health department. When I began to ask for a copy of those orders, then I was told in writing that it wasn't the local orders, but it was state orders that had ordered them closed, and the local health department was only echoing those. Well, that didn't jibe with what I'd been told, because the local health department had told me that there was no reason for them to close whatsoever, and that they'd been asked to stay open. So I began to research it, and I found out that all of the other homeless shelters that I could learn of or check with, every single one that I checked with, not only was open, but had never closed. The homeless shelters, so Shannon Meadows from the city of Springfield was telling us, and told so in writing, I have copies of the emails, that the state of Ohio had ordered congregate shelters to close. I want to be clear, that's not true. The fact is, no homeless shelter of any kind, period, any kind, has been ordered closed by the state of Ohio, by the health department of the state of Ohio, by the governor, or by any local health district that I can learn of. The centers in Dayton and Columbus and Cincinnati and Toledo and Lorain and Urbana and Troy and every other community that I can learn, every single one of them are open. Now, have they made adjustments to comply with COVID restrictions? Of course they have. Of course they have. Hasn't everyone? But they were able to remain open, and they were able to continue to function and provide the services to the homeless folks. And if they couldn't, then perhaps someone else should have. Only in Springfield, Ohio, let me repeat that, only in Springfield, Ohio, of all of the communities in Ohio, only here in Springfield was a homeless shelter closed in response to COVID. And that was done exclusively by the decision and the free will decision of the operators of that center, period. So that was very, very, very troubling to me to learn. From what I understand, there were other organizations willing to open centers, willing to offer space for sheltering people, other churches willing to use their facilities, and they were all told that congregate shelters were ordered closed, which is a blatant lie. In fact, I have a number of emails where that was repeated, but I also recorded a Zoom meeting on December 16th where she made that statement herself. So I'll show you a clip from that here. That, there's another 160 people still on the street. We could, if we work together, we could house all of those people really in a COVID-safe manner. The CDC and Department of Housing and Urban Development have both put out guidelines on how to operate shelters that are safe. We've got the space here to do it. We've got a 60,000 square foot building. So that's one of the reasons why we're so compelled to do something. And Inside Out, unless it sounded like last week there was another facility that was going to be brought online. Now it's not. Unless something else like that is brought online, we're going to do something, even if we have to do it alone.
William, yeah, I
If I could jump in real quick, I'm so sorry, but we definitely need to make sure that everybody understands there is definitely a difference between the private market individuals doing something and that which is available with public funds. And particularly during COVID, congregate sheltering is currently ordered closed.
But you keep suggesting that the congregate shelters are outlawed or forbidden, and unless somebody can show me a rule, that's just not the case. They are open in Dayton, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Lorain. Springfield is the only one that I'm aware of that is actually closed, and the CDC has specifically asked shelters not to close in their guidelines, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development has issued guidelines on how to run COVID-safe shelters. So I'm a little confused when I keep hearing that they've been closed by order of the health
department. The largest group, and not to go down a path that's going to take up more time than people are able to give. Congregate shelters are ordered to close.
So as you can see, there are no uncertain terms here. So there was no uncertain communication here and no uncertain terms. She told us that congregate type shelters are ordered closed, period. And repeated the statement again to disparage anyone that wanted to help, to provide this. Now, I can only guess as to the motives behind this, and perhaps if I begin to guess, it might sound accusatory. So I'll try not to guess too much, but it just seems to me that perhaps the people operating the local shelter are afraid of contracting disease themselves. Well, if they are, I don't blame you. I really don't. There are a lot of people who have fears of a lot of things. There are a lot of people who are afraid of running into burning buildings, and I wouldn't blame them for that or demand that they do so. But I would ask them not to be firemen. And I especially don't want them to be the firemen that are coming to save my burning home. I realize that a lot of people don't want to come into contact with an especially at-risk population like homeless folks during a pandemic. I can understand those fears. But folks, let's get real. Doctors and nurses do it every day because that's their job. They're dealing with the public. They're dealing with a need. The guy at the convenience store, when you go to get your gasoline and your necessary groceries, they expose themselves every day. They take precautions, what precautions they can, but they are at risk. And if they weren't, none of us could function. A dear friend of ours is a nurse, and she contracted COVID herself and was quarantined and suffered some symptoms, and thank God lived through it. But there is risk involved. And if someone doesn't feel like they should take that risk, then I wouldn't blame anyone for it. But they should get out of the way and let someone else do it, because the job still needs to be done. And the entire community is put at risk. The entire community is increased risk of spreading a disease if we leave these people on the streets without any, in addition to being troubled by the misinformation about why the homeless shelter closed, we're very, very troubled by the method being used in its place. This one-size-fits-all method of putting people in hotel rooms, we're being told that somehow adds to their dignity and somehow is the preferred method nationwide. That's not true. It's a method that's being added to supplement the more traditional methods of dealing with homelessness nationwide, but it has by no means, in no way, shape, or fashion replaced the traditional centers, not anywhere I'm aware of. The city of Springfield referred us to one article from Seattle, Washington, about a program there. They said it's like ours. But upon reading the article, instead of just the headline, what I found was that they were only using it for a small sliver of their homeless population. They proposed putting somewhere around 400 people in these hotels out of a homeless population of 11,500, just a small sliver. And in the article, it mentioned of 78 people in one area that applied for the rooms, only about half of them were actually approved for the rooms, because it's not a method that's appropriate for everyone. And most importantly, when they put people in these hotel rooms in other cities like Seattle, they're also putting 24/7 staff there, just like you'd have in a homeless shelter, to provide accountability and oversight and services, and make sure that the children aren't being neglected or abused, and that the rooms aren't being misused. That's just common sense. So, folks, these are just some of the problems that we have with this. Now, I keep talking about the problems. In one email recently to the group, and this is also troubling, folks. In one email that I sent to the group of faith-based leaders and city officials who are charged with resolving or helping with this homeless crisis, I mentioned the case of Ryden Palomino. And if you've never heard of Ryden Palomino was a 10-month-old baby boy who died as a direct result of this one-size-fits-all method of addressing homelessness by putting people in hotel rooms without accountability and oversight. Now, I mentioned that in an email that I sent out to the group as an example of some of the dangers that exist to children in these situations. Ryden's mother was given a hotel room at the Executive Inn, and she went and took him and strapped him into a car seat. She tied him up in a car seat and left him in the room so that she could go out and party. And the boy died. He died in that car seat. His mother was charged with involuntary manslaughter. And in this email, I mentioned that shouldn't have happened and wouldn't have happened if Ryden's mother had gone to a homeless shelter, and she wouldn't have been able to leave him there. Or maybe if she didn't have the room, she'd have been forced to leave him with family or friends, or not go party herself. I don't know. But it's just one example of what we've been talking about. Of the dozens of people that were on this email list that I sent out, no one wrote me to say they were heartbroken about Ryden. No one, not one. No one wrote me to say, wow, we see the point. Not one person of the community leaders and city officials. Instead, what I received was an email from Dr. Ruby of Central Christian threatening to excommunicate me from the group if I didn't apologize for criticizing the people at the Interfaith Hospitality Network and City of Springfield, because he felt that I was blaming them or saying that they were personally responsible or had caused the death of Ryden Palomino. And that I would be excommunicated and not allowed to talk to the group anymore if I didn't apologize and promise not to criticize them anymore. Well, I did acknowledge that in no way did I intend to say that anyone with any of those organizations intentionally brought harm to this child or wanted harm to him. Of course they didn't. Of course they were heartbroken. But I absolutely intended to say that was a result of this ill thought out policy. And instead of apologizing for the policy, people want me to apologize for bringing attention to it. Shame on you. Shame on all of you. Shame on all of you leaders who didn't have the heart or the courage to look at the case. This boy is dead. He was a child. I'm not going to apologize for bringing attention to that. And at some point, we should stop worrying about how many people in our clique get offended because somebody brings attention to this. Now, I did agree to withhold my criticism in the group, but the same pastor, just a couple of weeks later, is calling me up again, threatening or upset with me because the news story repeated a clip that my wife had said, had put on Facebook 2 months ago. Well, I'm not sorry that she put that on Facebook. It was true. It was true when she said it, and now it is a true fact, and that it went on there. It's a newsworthy fact, and so many people responded to that in a positive and helpful way. People's lives were impacted for good as a result of that. And those are people that would have been in the cold if we hadn't moved forward to do something. And we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have done the good that we've done if the people like yourselves hadn't seen that clip and been moved with compassion. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm not going to apologize for that. But I do believe that the folks the folks that were doing nothing instead of something should apologize. And Dr. Ruby, no Facebook post can undo the damage that was done by the negative news article, perhaps. But I want to tell you, no amount of Facebook posts and no amount of work that we can do now could ever undo the damage that was done to the 150 families that were left sleeping on the street for the best part of last year while people were being told that the homeless shelter was forced closed by the order of the state when it wasn't. No amount of Facebook posts or work that we'll do now can undo the damage that has been done to the conscience and the minds and the memories of the children that have been exposed to God knows what in these hotel rooms without oversight. No amount of Facebook posts is going to undo the damage that was done to the 12-year-old boy that called me in tears on a Friday night at midnight because he couldn't find his mother and couldn't get away back to the seedy hotel room that had been provided for her. No amount of Facebook posts is going to undo that damage, and you're worried about somebody's feathers being ruffled? I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm going to shout it to the north and scream it to the south, my friends. And so should you. Somebody should call your government officials, your state representatives, your local officials and say, you know what? Enough is enough. They're not doing this in other communities. This is Springfield. They're only doing this in Springfield. This is insanity. A one-size-fits-all method of putting everybody in hotel rooms and the stuff that goes with it. Do you know that there's a budget item of almost $200,000 for quarters? Quarters. This year, $96,000 is in the budget for quarters for the first half of this year to give people to do their laundry because they can't do it at the center anymore now that it's closed. So we're passing out rolls of quarters to people, many of whom have life-controlling issues, many of whom can't. And I don't mean to criticize these people. I love these people. That's why we're doing what we do. But we also recognize that there are some issues in their lives that have led to their homelessness. And handing them rolls of quarters to do their laundry may not be the best thing, especially when you're talking about $200,000 a year worth of quarters. For $200,000 a year, we could buy some commercial washers and dryers, and we could hire some of these homeless folks and give them full-time jobs and wash all of the clothes for them. We could do that for that kind of money. Somewhere around, I forget what it is, somewhere around $600,000 for food, because they can't eat at the shelters anymore. That is many times what our funding was when we were serving the same number of meals out of the Inside Out Center. Folks, we're spending the local government is budgeting $270,000 a month right now to put up 222 people in hotel rooms, and that still leaves people on the street. It still leaves people in the street, but $270,000 a month works out to about $1,200 a month per person, and that's just for the hotel room, not counting the quarters for the laundry, not counting the meal and gas and bus, etc., etc. There's a much, much, much more efficient way of doing this, and the more efficient way is also the better way. It's the way of getting involved, of rolling up your sleeves and actually getting involved with the people whose lives are affected by this, helping to find out what the underlying causes of homelessness are, what the underlying issues are, and encouraging them and inspiring those folks, helping them to become part of a community and to get their lives back on track. It takes work, folks, and it takes contact. I'm sorry. It takes contact. Now, we want to do it in as COVID-safe way as possible, and there are guidelines. And finally, let me say this. The city of Springfield and the local housing homeless agency are receiving most of these funds through federal and state grants. And they have been charged with the responsibility of doing this in accordance with HUD guidelines. I want to suggest that perhaps they're not meeting those guidelines either. One of the HUD guidelines, the HUD guidelines for homeless shelters in a COVID environment specifically say homeless shelters should not close. That's a quote from the HUD guidelines. So if homeless shelters are closed, and the city is continuing to fund the organizations with the HUD money, the federal money, then I want to suggest that maybe they're not meeting their obligations under those guidelines. I know this has been a little long. Thank you for your time and your attention, and thank you for caring about this and done. But I also want to point out that none of the people who came into the Inside Out Center to sleep or take a hot shower or eat a hot meal, none of those folks have complained. None of the people who had been on the streets for the most of last year or were in the cold, sleeping on the sidewalk behind Speedway, none of those folks were unhappy because we challenged this enough to open the Champion City mission. And for those of you who feel that I'm making the city or other officials look bad by calling attention to these truths, I want to challenge you to prove whether or not these things are true. If I point out that our local homeless shelters have closed when every other homeless shelter in the state of Ohio remained open, I'm not making them look bad. Their own decision makes them look bad. So I'm sorry if some of these truths cause people to feel like they've been put in a disparaging light. But I didn't make the decisions. We simply responded to them out of a heart of compassion, a heart for Jesus. We're not receiving any of the money from the city. We haven't asked for any of that. We're spending our own resources and our own time. My wife and I are volunteers here. So, folks, those of you that have contributed in some way to this cause, those of you who are praying, those of you who are spreading the word to people on the street that there's a place they can go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that there's a place they can sleep and get a hot shower. I just want to thank you for the things that you're doing. Thank you so much. We're going to continue to do what we can, while we can, where